He didn't raise his voice. He just whispered, "Take care of yourself." I honestly thought my husband was just upset, not heartbroken, not done with our marriage, just upset. The kind of disappointment that disappears after a few quiet days. A sincere apology, maybe a long conversation over dinner. I truly believed we'd be fine. I had no idea that what I was about to witness wasn't anger anymore. It was acceptance. And the moment my husband quietly whispered, "Take care of yourself," before walking out the front door, I realized I had misunderstood everything. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening. No shouting, no broken plates, no dramatic confession. Just another normal day after work. I left the office with a few coworkers for what was supposed to be a quick dinner. One meal turned into another round of drinks. Then another hour of laughing and talking. Time slipped away faster than I realized. When I finally looked at my phone, I saw 3 missed calls from my husband, Ethan. There was also one message: "Dinner's ready. I'll wait for you." I sighed, rolled my eyes, and quickly replied, "Don't wait. I'll eat outside." I didn't think it was a big deal. I'd done it before. By the time I reached home, it was almost 10 o'clock. As soon as I opened the front door, I noticed something strange. The house was unusually quiet. The dining table was beautifully set for two plates, 2 glasses, candles. Everything looked perfect, except the food had already gone cold. Ethan was sitting on the couch. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. He looked exhausted, not angry, not disappointed, just tired. "I'm sorry," I said while taking off my shoes. We all lost track of time. He looked at me for a few seconds. I prepared myself for another argument. Instead, he smiled, a small, gentle, almost heartbreaking smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "That was all. No questions, no complaints, no lecture, nothing." At the time, I actually felt relieved. I remember thinking, finally, he stopped making everything into a fight. Looking back now, I wish he had shouted, because people only raise their voices when they're still hoping to be heard. Silence means they've already accepted that nothing they say will change anything. Over the next few weeks, everything became strangely peaceful. He stopped asking what time I'd be home, stopped calling me during lunch, stopped reminding me to drive safely, stopped waiting awake for me at night. At first, I loved it. No more explanations, no more uncomfortable conversations, no more guilt. I thought our marriage had finally become easier. What I didn't realize was that my husband wasn't becoming more patient. He was quietly preparing himself to let me go. The change was so small at first that I almost missed it. Ethan stopped asking me how my day had been. He stopped telling me about his. We still lived in the same house. We still ate at the same table once in a while. But somehow, it felt like 2 strangers sharing the same address. One Saturday morning, I woke up much later than usual. The house was quiet. Normally, Ethan would already be in the kitchen making coffee. He always made my favorite, even on the mornings after we'd argued. That morning, the coffee maker was off. The kitchen was spotless. He was sitting alone on the back porch, staring into the yard with a cup of black coffee in his hands. "You're up early," I said with a smile. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep." I wanted to ask him what was wrong. Instead, I unlocked my phone and started scrolling through social media. A few minutes passed without either of us saying a word. Before I walked back inside, he quietly asked, "Do you think people can slowly fall out of love without realizing it?" I laughed. "I don't know. It's probably just a phase." He looked down at his coffee and gave a small nod. "Maybe." I didn't realize he wasn't asking about other people. He was asking about us. Days turned into weeks. The little things I had always taken for granted slowly disappeared. The sweet good morning texts, the surprise flowers, the handwritten notes he used to leave in my lunch bag, the warm hugs when I came home. Even his smile looked different, not fake, just empty. One evening, I walked into our bedroom and noticed an old photo album lying on the bed. It was filled with pictures from our honeymoon. I smiled as I flipped through the pages. There we were, laughing on the beach, cooking together in our tiny first apartment, holding hands during long walks. I looked up and saw Ethan standing quietly in the doorway. "Remember this trip?" I asked. He smiled softly. "I remember every moment." There was a long silence. Then he said something that didn't make sense to me at the time. "My favorite memories are starting to hurt more than they make me smile." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He simply shook his head. "Nothing." He turned around and walked away. I watched him leave without following him. I told myself he was just having a bad day. I had no idea. He had already started saying goodbye long before he ever walked out the door. After that conversation, something inside the house felt different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was just empty. A few days later, I came home earlier than usual because one of my meetings had been canceled. As I walked upstairs, I noticed our bedroom door was open. Ethan was sitting on the floor beside the closet. A small suitcase rested next to him. At first, I smiled. "Going somewhere?" He looked up at me. For a while, I laughed. "Business trip." He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly folded another shirt and placed it inside the suitcase. Something about the silence made my stomach tighten. "What's going on?" I asked. He stood up slowly and zipped the suitcase. Then he walked toward the living room. I followed him. "Ethan." He stopped near the front door. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his pocket, placed his wedding ring on the small table beside the door. My heart skipped. "What are you doing?" He looked at the ring, then at me. There were tears in his eyes, but they never fell. "I've spent the last year trying to save something that only one of us was trying to save." I shook my head. "No, don't say that. You never even told me?" A sad smile appeared on his face. "I did, so many times. You just stopped hearing me." I felt panic rising inside my chest. I reached for his hand. He gently stepped back, not with anger, not with hate, just kindness, the kind that hurts the most. "I don't hate you," he whispered. "I never will." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they terrified me, because people who still want to stay usually promise they'll try again. People who have already accepted the end speak gently, like they're saying goodbye to someone they'll never see again. I started crying. "We can fix this. I'll change. I promise." He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he quietly said, I waited a long time to hear those words. I just stopped believing they'd ever come. He picked up the suitcase, walked to the front door, placed one hand on the doorknob, then looked back at me one last time. There was no anger, no resentment, no blame, only sadness. A sadness so deep it had already become peace. He gave me one final smile. Barely above a whisper, he said, "Take care of yourself." Then he opened the door and walked away. I stood there, frozen, certain he'd come back in a few minutes. He never did. I stood there for what felt like hours. The front door was still open. The cold evening air drifted into the house, but I couldn't move. I kept telling myself he'd be back. Maybe he just needed some time to cool off. Maybe he'd go for a drive and return before midnight. That's what people do after an argument, right? Except we hadn't argued. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. There had been no yelling, no accusations, no slammed doors, just a quiet goodbye. I called his phone. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I called again, and again, nothing. I sent a message, "Please come home. We can talk." No reply. An hour later, another message. "I'm sorry. I'll change. I promise." Still nothing. The next morning, I woke up hoping the whole thing had been a nightmare. His side of the bed was untouched, cold, perfectly made. The closet was half empty. His favorite jacket, so were his shoes, his books, even the coffee mug he'd used every morning. It finally hit me. He hadn't left in anger. He had left with a plan. Everything I thought had happened in one night had actually happened over months. He had been saying goodbye long before he walked out that door. I was just too distracted to notice. Days turned into weeks. I called our mutual friends. None of them knew where he was. Or maybe they did, and they were simply respecting his decision. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. My hands were shaking before I even opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. It read, "If you're reading this, it means I've had enough time to remember who I was before I forgot myself. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I spent too many years loving someone who had stopped choosing me. Every missed dinner, every unanswered call, every promise that was never kept slowly taught me that I was no longer your priority. You didn't lose me in one night. You lost me one small moment at a time. I truly hope one day you find the happiness you were looking for, and I hope you never make someone else feel as invisible as I did. Goodbye." I read those words over and over again. By the time I looked up, my tears had covered the page. Months have passed since that day. People still ask what happened to my husband. I usually smile and say we wanted different things. The truth is much harder to admit. He wanted my time, my attention, my love, and I kept thinking he'd wait forever. I was wrong. If there's one thing I learned, it's that marriages rarely end because of one big mistake. They end because of hundreds of little moments when one person feels unseen, unheard, and eventually unloved. My husband didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He simply whispered, "Take care of yourself." And somehow, those 4 words hurt more than any argument ever could.